Oh, there we go. All right, another week, another tune on critics. Two lifelong friends and film buffs with very different tastes get together from across the country to discuss movies. My name is non-critic Dustin, and from Hawaii is
Non-critic Will.
alrighty. Today is the second part and probably the last part of little Doctor Who time. I can't think of a thing for it. Title.
Uh, an
Uh,
adventure in time and space.
well, yes, that we're watching that, but I mean, we watched the Doctor Who TV movie last week. We're following it up with an Adventure in Time and Space, a biopic, an original BBC television movie chronicling the first few years of Doctor Who. I decided to watch this because when I first saw it, I was very, very impressed with it and thought it would be interesting to talk about. And besides, the first few years of Doctor Who really gets sort of glanced over by a lot of new Who fans. They they love to watch the new series. They watch some of the classic stuff, but whenever they try to watch the early years, they kind of just skip over it. And I don't think that's really fair. And so I thought it'd be fun to talk about. So you watched it. What did you think?
Um, at first, uh, at first, I wasn't following it. Only reason why I say I wasn't following it is because I was expecting like a Dalek to come out or a Weeping Angel. Like I still was in the mindset of it being a Doctor Who uh, movie or episode. So I was expecting like, okay, something's gonna come out, but then I just really had to really transition to no, this is just about how it all came to be, how the film, how the series came to be, and once I got once I got used to that, it was a really good good story of how Doctor Who came, and I get one thing that was really interesting from that I thought was around the same time that they put out the very first episode of Doctor Who was the day after John F. Kennedy's assassination. So of course nobody's going to care about a TV show after what just happened with the president. So Lambert, I think it
Verity
her,
Lambert.
Verity,
Verity Lambert. Yes.
yeah, yeah, Verity Lambert, who was the producer, she wanted to run the first episode again because of the tragic situation that just happened. She wanted to run the first episode again because it didn't get great reviews because nobody was really paying attention to Doctor Who. So the fact that they were able to play the first episode again and not just go to the second, it really, you know, um, made a big impact the second time around because people actually did watch it and it became a big hit. So, but pretty much all this is just how Doctor Who came to be, and the very first actor, William Hartnell,
Mm-hmm.
how William Hartnell um, first was the first Doctor, played the first role of the Doctor, and it's it's his um his beginning to end, his rise and his fall as a Doctor because of just the illness that he had. He was slowly declining in his health, and he was starting to forget. So I thought it was a very passionate, actually, very passionate story. Story, real life. It was a very passionate thing that he went through because he grew attached to that character and he did not want to leave. And I felt his pain. I felt his pain because something that you go attached to for so long, it doesn't have to be as far as a character. It can be a person that you grow attached to. It can be a book. It can be anything. Something that you grow attached to, you don't want to let it go, and it's very hard to let it go. So everybody can, everybody has felt that way one time or another. So I definitely can relate to that, and I felt bad for him, throughout the rise and the decline because you see how he slowly just deteriorating away.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a great story. I'm happy that you recommended it. At first, like when I first started watching it, to be honest, I was just like, I want to turn this off. They're just talking about making the film or making the series. Like, God, I want to turn this off. But I'm not going to do it. But as the minutes went by, as it started getting into like 20 minutes to a half an hour, I started really paying close attention to what was being said, what they were trying to do, how they were trying to, increase the popularity of this series. And one thing that was a big issue was the Daleks. But, because what was not the director,
The creator?
The creator, yeah.
Yeah, it was Sidney Newman.
Sidney Newman. He was totally against the Daleks because he didn't want it to be some type of sci-fi type of
Schlock.
series.
Like he didn't want he like the bug-eyed monsters. He said the BENs.
Yeah, but that was a whole turnaround once he saw that the children were quoting some of the famous lines of the Daleks, like exterminate. So it increased the popularity, and he was happy about it. So there was a lot of, basically in a nutshell, there was a lot of things that could have stopped this series from growing into one of the greatest. I can say that one of the greatest shows of UK. There was a lot of things that could have stopped it just because of people's feelings of what happened at that certain time, the president being assassinated. I don't like how these aliens looked. Like there was a lot of things that was hindering it, but it still succeeded, still sufficed, and it still is strong to this day, and will be strong for probably the next 50 years.
Probably.
So I like it. I liked it.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things about it is you realize how almost accidental the show is.
Uh-huh.
I think as fans we like to pretend like there was a grand plan in place to create this show that would be remembered forever with this rich mythology. But all of that happened over time. This was a show that was being invented while it was still on the air. It's still sort of being invented.
Yeah.
And, I mean, for all intents and purposes, William Hartnell was the Doctor. He wasn't the first Doctor. At that time, that's all anybody knew.
Yeah, he was the Doctor.
Yeah, they never had any intention of the regeneration. They never had any intention of half the things they did. They were just, that phrase, tap dancing as fast as they could. They were sort of laying the tracks in front of the speeding train, like the show's taking off. And you're right. It seemed like there's everything in its way. It's like the BBC didn't give a shit.
Yeah.
And even the guy, Sidney Newman, as much as he loved it, he didn't like a lot of the decisions that were being made. And it's a show that could have just lasted 6 episodes and disappeared into obscurity. But based on, just the passion of the people working on it and their belief in the project, it grew into something really, really special that connected with a lot of people. And I think it's interesting, too, during that first half hour where you were kind of distracted, I think it's interesting that for so many of the people working on it, this was just another job. That's something I hear a lot from people who are working on these things that we consider classics. They saw them just another gig. They didn't see it as, I'm working on this important project. It was, all right, this is just another job I have, and I'll do it, and then I'll move on. But it ended up to have such a huge impact on their life. And I do think that the story of William Hartnell is at the core of the movie, because you can tell right from the get-go, he's a dude who loves acting.
Yes.
But he doesn't feel he's ever been given a role that he can really put himself into. He's complaining that the only roles he ever gets offered are crooks or like generals in the army, and he felt like that's not who he was. And so the chance to play this doctor character, this grand old man of the universe with a bit of a twinkle in his eye really, really appealed to him. And I think there's this stigma with William Hartnell's Doctor that he was just this cold and difficult man, and he was at first because that's how he was written. But if you really watch it, his Doctor warms up quite a bit, and he really becomes very grandfatherly, and he does get that twinkle in his eye. Like, there's that scene, very, very famous scene. It's still probably the most famous scene ever in Doctor Who, and it's the speech he gives when he says goodbye to Susan, his granddaughter. He says, "Someday I will come back. Yes, I will come back." And he does the whole speech. They do the speech in the movie, and David Bradley, who plays William Hartnell, incredibly well. He delivers the line. He does an amazing job delivering the line. But then at the very end of the movie, the camera sort of zooms in on a monitor, and it shows William Hartnell actually delivering that line. And it makes you tear up because you can see that he really is putting all of himself into this role, and he really, really cares about it. And I think, like I said, a lot of people dismiss the early Doctor, and I think if they were to watch this, they would have a new respect for him because he laid the groundwork for 50 years worth of Doctor Who. And I think the entire cast is pretty great. I mean, with British television, 75% of the time their actors are superb. Occasionally you'll get the kind of crappy show and that the actors don't really invest themselves, but more often than not, definitely more often than in American television, the actors are really invested in what they're doing, and I get the feeling that each actor in this movie cared about getting this movie right.
Yeah.
And that really, really struck me when I saw it the first time. That's why I watched this movie so many times. And it's because other than the fact that I'm a Doctor Who fan, and I like the historical context of the movie, I just really like it. I think the production is fantastic. This looks like it could have played in a theater. It doesn't necessarily look like a movie for television, and I think all the actors are just giving 150%. Were there any, other than, say, William Hartnell, were there any characters in the movie or anything that struck you?
Actually, Verity Lambert. Well, the actress that was playing Verity Lambert. Just her passion and determination to make the show be a success. It's actually two parts was when she was dead. She was so dead on about playing the first episode again because of what happened with the tragedy of John F. Kennedy. She was dead on, like, we have to play this again, play the first episode, and she was able to convince Newman to play the episode. And then you saw more of her passion for the show, for the series, when she was expressing when she was describing the Daleks. Because first off, Newman kept saying, these Daleks. She's like, no, they're Daleks, first off. And, she said they're humans that have been mutated or whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Mutated by radiation, so they had, like, I guess their bodies, like, adapt. They learned to adapt to their surroundings, and they became these creatures called the Daleks, but now they hate every other type of race or type of species that's around them. They hate everything. So, she's just very passionate, very deep about just explaining a certain character creation of the show. So you saw her passion, her determination to make this project work and let it be long-lasting. So aside from William Hartnell, her character stood out the most for me. Now, what I did like also was that, it's not really a spoiler, it's not a movie, it's just real life situation. Yeah, just look at
but the very end, when William Hartnell was on the monitor, like he was doing his last episode of Doctor Who, and he looks up, and he's looking at Matt Smith, who is, well, at the time was the current Doctor. Now it's I don't know the new
Oh,
actor's
that part isn't really history. That's a little bit of a spoiler, but it's fine. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Really look up and see Matt Smith.
it's not history, but it was very symbolic of how far this series has gone. That it's still going on today, and it's still going strong. And every time there's a new regeneration, we are in shock, we're in amaze, we're in anticipation of what actor's going to play the next Doctor.
Yeah.
Like everybody is always in shock. Like even people that don't even really watch the show. Some people that don't even really watch the show, they'll still know all the time. They'll still be curious of who's the next actor that's going to play this so-called character, Doctor Who. It's like it. As far as for the UK side, it's kind of like the Super Bowl. Like who's gonna be the next? Who's gonna win? It's that big to where everybody's just like, who's gonna play the next Doctor? Because it's such a big secret, and it builds up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like Super Bowl for the UK.
Well, that might be overstating it a little bit, but no, yeah, it is huge because it is a part of. It's been a part of their culture much longer than it's been a part of. I mean, yes, America has been playing reruns of Doctor Who for almost 50 years, but I mean, it's never until now. It's never really been part of our culture, and I mean, even Christopher Eccleston, who played the Ninth Doctor, he even said in an interview he didn't watch Doctor Who much when he was growing up because he didn't really like the low production value, but he would watch it when he knew two things were going to happen. Either it was a Daleks episode, or there was a regeneration. He would always get, even though he wasn't a fan of the show, he thought the Daleks were exciting, so he'd watch a Dalek episode, and the regeneration is exciting, because the show that has been a part of so many people's lives is changing and reinventing itself. And that's something that didn't exist during the early parts of the series and only happened out of necessity. And this show, so much of the show happened out of necessity. I mean, in the very beginning, Sidney Newman is having like a little production meeting with these two other guys, and they realize that there's a gap in their schedule, that they lose viewers at a certain time, and they need a program that'll keep those viewers in their seats to keep watching. And so he realizes we need a show that's entertaining enough for families that'll keep the kids in their seats and the teeny boppers in their seats for the next show that comes on. And he realizes science fiction is popular. Young people like science fiction. Smart people like science fiction. It's new. It's exciting. Let's pop, pop, pop. That was his little catchphrase. He kept saying pop, pop, pop. And so he came up with the idea for Doctor Who. And it has become this huge thing that every Doctor now is some generation's first Doctor. When you think about it, William Hartnell was the Doctor for 3 years. For 3 years, that's all anybody knew. And so when he regenerated into Patrick Troughton, a bunch of people had to adjust to that. But then again, there were a bunch of kids who were too young to watch the show or remember the show in those early years. They finally get their own Doctor, and so on and so forth. So it really has become such a huge multi-generational thing, which is incredible when you think about how it was just something that was trying to stay on the air for so long. And like you said about Verity Lambert, what I think is so interesting about her character is at first you get the feeling, at least in this movie, I don't know if it was like this in history, but at first you get the feeling she wants the show to stay on the air because she wants to prove herself. Everyone thinks the reason she got to be a producer is because she was sleeping with Sidney Newman. She was the first female producer ever in the BBC history. She had something to prove. And then very quickly you got the feeling that it went from I want to prove myself as a producer to I care about this show. I care about Bill Hartnell. I want this to go on. I care about the kids. And I think that's a perfect symbol for what happened with Doctor Who. Is it went from a show that either people didn't want on the air or they wanted on the air for the wrong reasons, and then sort of just became a part of their culture. And also you got to think how revolutionary the show was. We take it for granted now, but the Daleks, they're Nazis. They are not. They are a symbol of the Nazis. They all look the same. They all sound the same. They want everyone to look the same and sound the same and kill anyone who doesn't. And now, 50 years later, I mean, come on, World War II's been over for 60 some odd years, or about 60 years. And so to us, the idea of using a Nazi as a symbol, that's old hat. Star Wars did it. The Stormtroopers. They're Nazis. They even took the name Stormtroopers. That's what they are. They're Nazis. That's what the Empire is. So to us, we're used to that. But at that time, the wound that was Hitler is still fresh. So for people to see these creatures that represent what was the world's greatest fear at the time, and it's a real fear, it was probably very, very hard for them. Like today, the only equivalent would probably be Al-Qaeda, right?
Yeah.
And 9/11. But instead of us coming up with fictional versions or trying to filter that through some sort of science fiction lens, we just do stories about terrorists. They're all over the place. I think the only thing, and I'm going to sound like an idiot here because it's off the top of my head, but the first time I ever watched something that wasn't reality, that made me think of terrorism in a real way again, because we sort of became numb to it, was War of the Worlds, the Steven Spielberg War of the Worlds. That evoked so much real emotion for me when the tripods were just laying waste to people, and you saw this sort of real pain of having to cope with it, and that was sort of a real world fear filtered through fiction as a way to sort of cope with it. And that's kind of what Daleks were.
Yeah.
And it's also, you got to think they had the radiophonic orchestra conducting the music, this really futuristic techno-y type music. They're trying to use new technologies. Like I said, this is all stuff we take for granted, and we look at early Doctor Who and sort of scoff at it because the budget was so low. But that stuff they're doing was pretty revolutionary for the time. And you can really see that because Sidney Newman, he's a Canadian working for British television, coming over from ITV, which is BBC's competition, more or less. And so you've got that, which is new. He's all about creating things that are new. And you've got Verity Lambert, who's the first female producer in the history of the BBC. You've got the director whose name slips my mind, who directed the first few episodes. A lot of the first episodes of Doctor Who. It's the first Indian director. And so there's a whole lot of newness going on that we now look at it as old. I just think that's really fascinating. And I wanted to bring up how you said, the William Hartnell, and how sort of emotional it was for him to have to deal with leaving. I don't know if they did this intentionally or if someone has gone on record as saying that William Hartnell did this. But when he tells his wife that they're recasting Doctor Who, and he's just sort of staring in the fireplace, and he's trying to be strong about it, and then he just breaks down, and he's holding himself up on the fireplace, and he's crying, and he says, "I don't want to go. I don't want to go." I don't know if Mark Gatiss is the writer of this. He's written a lot of Doctor Who episodes. Not all of them of the highest quality. Some of them pretty good, but I mean, he's a really interesting guy. Anyway, I don't know if he intended that line to mirror David Tennant's last line as the Doctor, which is "I don't want to go," or if William Hartnell really did that. But I thought that was kind of an interesting touch.
Yeah.
If it was an homage to what David Tennant did, it's sort of similar to when he sees Matt Smith. Now, when I first saw this, when he looked up and saw Matt Smith, that almost killed the whole movie because it was so out of place. It's not like there were other moments in the show where, or in the episode, the movie, sorry, where he saw other people involved in Doctor Who nowadays. You know, like there weren't any hints of that. It was just all of a sudden, look, Matt Smith, and I was like, oh, that's kind of, I don't know, that's kind of corny, man. But now when I watch it, I actually get really emotional because I realize, like you said, it's symbolic. It's not. You're not meant to think he's actually seeing Matt Smith. That's them. That's communicating to the audience.
Yeah.
Because of this man, Matt Smith can play the Doctor today.
Yeah.
Without him, I firmly believe this. Without him, the show may not have gone on this long. So, yeah, I think it's just. I could talk about this forever, but I think we've kind of pretty much covered all our bases. I haven't even mentioned all the little Easter eggs in it, like the sorry, my cat wants to be on the show. Yeah, like there's so many like actors who make cameos in this movie who were in the show during William Hartnell's run. I'm not even going to go into it because it would take too long, but it's just this movie's a very sweet, very tender. Okay, stop it. Sorry, very tender love letter to Doctor Who, and I think everyone should watch it. Even if you're not a fan, you should watch it because it's just a great. Would you recommend to people who aren't even Doctor Who fans?
I would recommend it. But I would recommend it for people that haven't seen it. Though I would have them watch at least one episode, so they'll just get some type of gist of it first, because them just watching how it all came together, they're like, what? Like, I can see some people like, what the hell is this? What am I watching?
Yeah.
So I would want them to watch at least an episode so they can get like, okay, this is how it is.
Right.
Because every episode, in a sense, is a story.
Absolutely. So, okay, we went on long enough. We're just going to start repeating ourselves if we haven't already. An adventure in space and time. Do whatever you can to see it. I don't care.